Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the blue-green world grow larger on the main screen. After 18 months in deep space, they had finally reached Kepler 442b. The colony ship carried 50,000 people, who were ready to start new lives on this distant planet. Jake felt proud as he looked at the readings that showed clear skies and breathable air waiting for them below. The ship buzzed with excitement as families prepared for landing. In the lower decks, children pressed their faces against windows to see their new home. 8-year-old Tommy Baker asked his mother when they could go outside and play. 12-year-old Susan Kelly helped her father pack their belongings. The kids had spent most of their lives on the ship, and they were eager to run on real ground under an open sky. Lisa Grant worked at the navigation station and made small adjustments to their approach. She had been Jake's second in command for 3 years and knew the ship better than anyone. The computers showed everything was normal as they entered orbit around the planet. All systems were green, and the landing zones looked perfect for their new settlement. Then the alarms started. Screaming. Jake spun around as red lights flashed across every console. Lisa's hands flew over her controls as she tried to understand what was happening. The sensors showed nothing, but something was very wrong. The ship shuddered as if hit by invisible hands. "Captain, we have contacts," Lisa called out. Her voice stayed calm, but Jake could hear the fear underneath. Multiple ships, very large, coming out of stealth right around us. The main screen changed to show the space around them. Massive gray ships appeared from nowhere, surrounding the New Horizon like sharks around a wounded fish. The alien vessels were 3 times larger than their colony ship and covered with weapons that could turn them to dust in seconds. "Try to contact them," Jake ordered, but he already knew it was too late. The aliens had planned this perfectly. They had waited until the humans were trapped in orbit with nowhere to run. A beam of blue light hit the New Horizon, and all their weapons went dead. Then their engines stopped working. Jake felt his heart sink as he realized they were completely helpless. The colony ship had some defensive systems, but nothing that could fight these massive warships. The communication system crackled to life, and a cold voice spoke in perfect English. "Human vessel, you will prepare for boarding. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction." Jake looked at Lisa and saw his own fear reflected in her eyes. They had brought 50,000 innocent people to this remote world, including thousands of children. Now they were all trapped with no way to escape or fight back. The alien ships moved closer, and Jake could see smaller craft leaving their bays. The boarding pods were heading straight for the New Horizon. He opened the ship-wide communication system and tried to keep his voice steady. "All hands, prepare for boarding. Protect the children at all costs. Do not give them any reason to hurt our families." The first impact shook the entire ship as the alien pods attached to the hull. Jake heard the sound of cutting tools as they burned through the metal. In minutes, they would be inside the ship with weapons far beyond anything the humans carried. Bill Turner was in the engine room when the aliens cut through the wall. He had been a mechanic for 20 years and knew every bolt and wire in the New Horizon. When the tall, insect-like creatures stepped through the hole they had made, Bill grabbed a wrench and stood between them and the door that led to the family quarters. The aliens looked like giant praying mantises walking on 2 legs. Their arms ended in sharp claws, and their eyes were huge and black. They carried weapons that hummed with energy and made the air smell like lightning. One of them pointed its weapon at Bill and spoke in that same cold voice. "Move aside, human. We require access to your young." Bill raised his wrench higher. "You'll have to go through me first." The alien made a sound that might have been laughter. It pressed a button on its weapon, and Bill felt his muscles lock up. He could still see and hear everything, but his body would not move. He fell to the floor like a statue, still conscious but completely helpless. Amy Roberts was reading to a group of children in the ship's library when the aliens found them. She had been a teacher for 15 years and loved these kids like they were her own. When the insect creatures walked into the room, the children screamed and ran to hide behind her. "Please," Amy begged as the aliens approached. "They're just children. They haven't done anything wrong." The lead alien tilted its head and studied the terrified kids. "These specimens are within the required age range. They will come with us." Amy tried to grab little Sally Chen as the aliens reached for her, but the neural weapon left her frozen on the floor. She could only watch in horror as they took the children one by one. The kids cried for their parents, but the aliens showed no emotion as they carried them away. All across the ship, the same scene played out. Parents fought desperately to protect their children, but the alien weapons made resistance impossible. The creatures moved with cold efficiency, taking only the kids between 6 and 16 years old. They left the adults alive but paralyzed, helpless to stop them. Jake lay on his bridge, unable to move, as the alien commander spoke to him. "Your young will serve the Vorthak hegemony. They will be trained and conditioned to fight in our armies. Adults are genetically inferior and not worth the resources to eliminate. You will be left on the planet's surface to live or die as you choose." The aliens finished their harvest in 3 hours. They took 8,000 children and left the adults stranded on a world with minimal supplies. As the great ships disappeared into hyperspace, the survivors slowly regained control of their bodies. But their hearts remained broken, and their fury began to grow. 6 months had passed since the aliens took their children, and the planet the survivors now called Fury had tried to kill them every single day. The death count stood at 23,000, nearly half of all the adults who had been left behind. Some died from the radiation that poured down from the twin suns. Others starved when the emergency food ran out. Many simply gave up hope and walked into the acid storms that swept across the landscape every few weeks. But those who remained alive had become something harder than the metal hull of their crashed ship. They were no longer the soft colonists who had dreamed of peaceful farms and quiet towns. Fury had burned away everything weak inside them, and left only the core of what made humans dangerous when their children were threatened. Dr. Karen White worked in the medical bay they had built deep underground using pieces of the New Horizon. She had been a family doctor before the attack, treating scraped knees and common colds. Now she performed surgery without proper tools and treated radiation sickness with medicines made from local plants. Her hands had become steady and sure as she learned to save lives under impossible conditions. The planet tested them with new horrors every day. The acid storms came without warning, turning the air into poison that could melt skin in minutes. The twin suns pumped out radiation that made people sick and weak. Worst of all were the creatures the survivors called bone crushers. These 6-legged beasts were the size of bears but moved faster than wolves. Their shells were harder than steel, and their claws could cut through metal like paper. Paul Davis led the construction teams that turned the wreckage of their ship into an underground city. He had built office buildings back on Earth, but now he designed tunnels and bunkers that could keep families alive in this nightmare world. Every piece of metal was precious, and every mistake could mean death for the people counting on him. The bone crushers hunted in packs and seemed to enjoy making humans suffer before they killed them. The survivors learned to move in groups and never go anywhere without weapons. Former office workers became hunters who tracked the beasts through underground caves. Accountants learned to set traps and fight with knives made from ship parts. Colonel Dan Murphy had been retired from the military for 10 years when the aliens attacked. Now he trained every survivor who could hold a weapon. The old soldier taught librarians how to shoot and showed farmers how to move like infantry. Everyone who wanted to live had to learn how to fight, because Fury would kill anyone who was weak or slow. The most dangerous job was food gathering. The planet had almost nothing humans could eat on the surface. The only protein came from fungus that grew in deep cave systems where bone crushers liked to make their nests. Teams of volunteers would descend into the darkness with makeshift weapons and hope they could harvest enough food before the creatures found them. Maria Lopez had been an engineer on the New Horizon, and now she spent her days taking apart alien technology they had salvaged from the attack. The Vorthak had left behind some damaged equipment, and Maria slowly learned how their systems worked. Each small discovery brought them closer to understanding their enemies and maybe finding a way to reach their children. Dr. White made an amazing discovery in the 3rd month. Some of the minerals found deep in the caves could be processed into a drug that made humans faster and stronger. The radiation from the twin suns was changing their bodies in ways that would have killed them on Earth, but here it made them more than they had been before. Survivors who took the mineral supplements could run faster, think quicker, and heal from wounds that should have been fatal. The changes were not just physical. People who had been neighbors and strangers on the ship now formed bonds deeper than family. They shared everything and protected each other with a fierce loyalty that went beyond normal human behavior. Children who were born on Fury came into the world different from regular humans. They were stronger, smarter, and seemed to understand things without being taught. Tony Kim worked day and night to repair the long-range communication system using parts from the crashed ship. When he finally got it working, the news from Earth was devastating. The attacks had not been random. Vorthak fleets had hit dozens of human colonies across the galaxy. Hundreds of thousands of children had been taken from their families and disappeared into alien space. But Tony also received messages from other survivor groups on different worlds. Each group of stranded humans was changing and adapting to their harsh new homes. On the ice world called Hoth 7, survivors had developed the ability to withstand temperatures that would freeze normal humans solid. On Titan's Rest, where gravity was 3 times stronger than Earth, the humans had become incredibly strong and fast. The survivors on Fury created what they called the Children's Promise. Every adult who was still alive swore an oath that they would not rest until every human child was free. They would not surrender, and they would not die until their kids came home. This promise became more than words. It became a driving force that pushed them beyond normal human limits and gave them strength when their bodies should have failed. Dr. Lisa Crane had been a child psychologist before the attack, and she studied every piece of communication they could intercept from Vorthak ships. The aliens were using their human children as soldiers in wars across the galaxy. They broke down the kids' minds and rebuilt them as perfect weapons. But Dr. Crane found signs that some children were fighting back in secret, keeping their humanity hidden while they waited for rescue. The survivors on Fury began to plan their revenge. They could not match alien technology, but they had something the Vorthak did not understand. Humans would sacrifice everything for their children, and they would never stop fighting as long as even one child remained in alien hands. The planet that was supposed to kill them had instead forged them into something new and dangerous. Winter came to Fury, bringing storms that were worse than anything they had faced. The cold was so intense that metal became brittle and broke. Food became even harder to find, and the bone crushers grew more aggressive as they hunted for anything warm to eat. Many survivors thought this would be the end of their struggle. Instead, they emerged from winter stronger and more determined than ever. They had survived the worst that an alien world could throw at them. They had learned to fight monsters with their bare hands and turn poison into medicine. Most importantly, they had kept their promise to their children alive in their hearts. As spring returned to Fury, the survivors began to receive messages from other human groups across the galaxy. A plan was forming, a way to coordinate their efforts and strike back at the aliens who had stolen their most precious treasures. The Vorthak thought they had defeated humanity by taking their children, but they had made a terrible mistake. They had unleashed something far more dangerous than any weapon or army. They had awakened the fury of parents who had nothing left to lose. 2 years had passed since the Vorthak took their children, and the humans on Fury had become something that would have terrified their former selves. The weak had died, and the strong had grown stronger in ways that defied everything known about. human biology. They were no longer just survivors fighting to stay alive. They had become a weapon forged in the fires of an alien hell, and that weapon was pointed directly at the hearts of their enemies. Rachel Stone crouched in the ruins of a Vorthak communications outpost they had destroyed 3 months ago. She had been an intelligence analyst for the military before retirement, but now she was something much more dangerous. Her team had learned to hack alien computer systems using a combination of stolen technology and pure human stubbornness. Every day brought new information about where their children were being held and what was being done to them. The news was horrifying. The Vorthak were not just using human children as soldiers. They were systematically destroying everything that made the kids human and rebuilding them as perfect weapons. The process involved isolation chambers, sensory deprivation, and neural manipulation that rewrote basic brain functions. The aliens wanted to create soldiers who would obey without question and feel no mercy for their enemies. But Rachel had found something the Vorthak did not expect. Hidden in their own communication records were signs that some human children were resisting the conditioning. Kids as young as 8 years old were finding ways to maintain secret contact with each other. They were developing codes and signals that let them keep their humanity alive even under the worst torture their captors could imagine. Dr. Lisa Crane worked with Rachel to analyze every piece of intercepted data about the conditioning process. Lisa had spent her career understanding how children's minds worked, and now she used that knowledge to find weaknesses in alien psychology programs. The Vorthak thought they understood human behavior, but they had missed something crucial about the nature of childhood resilience. The most shocking discovery came from studying the children's hidden communications. Some kids were developing abilities that seemed impossible. Twins, separated by thousands of miles, could somehow sense each other's emotions. Children who had never shown special talents were demonstrating perfect memory for everything they saw or heard. A few seemed to be developing the ability to influence electronic systems just by being near them. Kevin Brooks had been a genetics researcher before the attack, and his work on Fury revealed why these changes were happening. The extreme stress and trauma of their situation was triggering evolutionary adaptations that normally took thousands of years to develop. The human children were literally evolving in real time, becoming something more than baseline humanity, under the pressure of alien conditioning. The survivors on Fury were not alone in their transformation. Messages from other stranded human groups revealed similar changes happening across the galaxy. On the ice world of Hoth 7, humans had developed enhanced metabolism that let them survive in temperatures that would kill normal people in minutes. Their children were being born with natural resistance to cold that bordered on the supernatural. On Titan's Rest, where gravity was 3 times Earth normal, the survivors had become incredibly strong and fast. Their reflexes were so quick they could dodge projectile weapons, and their bone density had increased to levels that made them nearly bulletproof. The children born there were even more enhanced, showing abilities that seemed to come from science fiction stories. Tony Kim coordinated communications between 17 different survivor groups scattered across alien space. Each group had adapted to their environment in unique ways, but they all shared the same burning desire to rescue their children. They were beginning to work together on something that had never been attempted before in human history: a coordinated military operation spanning multiple solar systems. The plan they developed was called Operation Homecoming, and it was audacious beyond anything humans had ever attempted. Instead of trying to match Vorthak technology directly, they would use their greatest advantage: the fact that no other species in the galaxy was capable of the sacrifices humans would make for their children. The aliens could not predict or counter tactics based on pure desperation and unlimited willingness to die for family. Maria Lopez had made incredible progress in understanding alien technology by reverse engineering captured equipment. She discovered that Vorthak computer systems were built around rigid hierarchical programming. Their entire civilization was based on predictable responses and logical decision trees. They literally could not process tactics that appeared suicidal or irrational from a military standpoint. This weakness became the foundation of human strategy. Every plan they developed was designed to create maximum confusion in Vorthak command systems. Human ships would ram alien vessels instead of fighting. Conventional battles. Boarding parties would carry explosives designed to destroy themselves along with their targets. Computer viruses would sacrifice entire networks to deliver single pieces of critical information. The children imprisoned on Vorthak worlds had developed their own resistance network. Led by kids who were now teenagers after years of captivity, they had learned to appear broken and compliant while secretly maintaining their humanity. They gathered intelligence about guard rotations, security systems, and the location of other human prisoners. Most importantly, they never stopped believing that their parents would come for them. Emma Foster had been 12 when the aliens took her, and now she was 16 and harder than steel. She had endured 4 years of conditioning that was designed to turn her into a perfect Vorthak soldier. Instead, she had become something the aliens never expected, a human weapon that remembered exactly who she was fighting for. Her network of young rebels had spread across multiple slave worlds, waiting for the signal that rescue was coming. The Vorthak had made a fundamental error in their understanding of human nature. They assumed that children separated from their families would eventually forget their origins and accept alien control. They did not realize that human family bonds could survive any amount of torture or conditioning. The kids never stopped hoping, and that hope had become a weapon more dangerous than any technology. Dr. White's medical research had revealed another crucial advantage. The humans on Fury and other worlds were developing immunities to Vorthak, weapons and control systems. Their changed biology was becoming resistant to neural disruptors and mind control devices. They were literally evolving to fight their enemies in ways the aliens could not counter. As the third year began, the scattered human survivors had become something unprecedented in galactic history. They were an entire species that had been forged into warriors by the theft of their children. Every adult who remained alive was dedicated to a single purpose that consumed their entire existence. They would free their kids or die trying, and they had become capable of violence that would horrify their enemies. The Vorthak hegemony controlled hundreds of worlds and had conquered dozens of other species over thousands of years. They had never faced an enemy like humanity, one that grew stronger under pressure and more dangerous when their families were threatened. They were about to learn what happened when humans had nothing left to lose except the children they would kill or die to protect. Operation Homecoming was ready to begin, and the galaxy was about to discover why no intelligent species should ever threaten human children. The parents were coming, and they had spent years learning how to turn their grief and rage into weapons that could tear apart an interstellar empire. 3 years after the Vorthak stole their children, the first phase of Operation Homecoming exploded across 17 different worlds in a coordinated strike that shook the alien empire to its core. The humans were no longer the helpless colonists who had begged for mercy. They had become something the galaxy had never seen before. An entire species transformed into weapons by the theft of their most precious treasures. Steve Clark had been an accountant before the attack, spending his days with numbers and spreadsheets in a quiet office on Earth. Now he led a team of 40 volunteers in a suicide mission against a Vorthak supply depot on the edge of their territory. The humans had studied alien patrol routes for months, learning exactly when the defenses would be weakest. They were not trying to win a battle or capture territory. They only wanted to steal navigation codes that would tell them where the slave ships traveled. The attack lasted 18 minutes from start to finish. Steve's team used explosives made from processed cave minerals to blow holes in the depot's outer walls. They fought through corridors filled with alien guards, using weapons, cobbled together from ship parts and pure determination. When the Vorthak reinforcements arrived, 38 humans were already dead, but Steve had downloaded the navigation data they needed before a plasma blast ended his life. Similar raids were happening across the galaxy as human survivor groups launched coordinated strikes against Vorthak outposts. These were not military victories in any traditional sense. They were desperate gambles by parents who cared nothing for their own survival and everything for the children who had been stolen from them. Each successful mission cost dozens of human lives, but yielded pieces of information that brought them closer to their kids. The Vorthak commanders were confused by these attacks. In their experience, defeated species either surrendered completely or fought conventional wars for territory and resources. They could not understand an enemy that would sacrifice 40 lives to steal a single computer file. Their military computers struggled to process tactics that made no logical sense from a strategic standpoint. Meanwhile, on the slave worlds, the stolen children had been conducting their own secret war. Emma Foster was 18 now, trained by her captors to be a perfect soldier, but secretly leading a resistance network that spanned multiple planets. The Vorthak had taught her to kill efficiently and follow orders without question, never realizing she was using those same skills to organize a rebellion. The alien conditioning process had failed in ways the Vorthak could not detect. Human children, forced to endure years of isolation and neural manipulation, had developed abilities that bordered on the supernatural. Emma could sense the emotional states of other humans across vast distances, feeling their pain and hope like physical sensations. This connection had allowed her to coordinate with children on different worlds without using any technology the aliens could monitor. Peter Hunt had been 10 when the aliens took him from his parents. Now he was 14 and possessed perfect memory for everything he had seen or heard during his captivity. He had memorized guard rotations, security codes, maintenance schedules, and the location of every human child on his prison world. The Vorthak thought he was broken and compliant, but Peter was actually a living database of intelligence that would be crucial for the rescue operation. Kate Morgan had spent 4 years learning to hide her growing ability to influence electronic systems through proximity alone. The aliens had no idea that she could cause their computers to malfunction or their security cameras to show false images. She used this talent to help other children communicate in secret and to gather information about Vorthak military operations. The children had discovered something their captors never expected: human adolescent brains subjected to extreme trauma, sometimes developed adaptations that allowed them to survive impossible conditions. They formed psychic connections with their siblings and friends that let them share strength and hope across any distance. Most importantly, they never forgot who they really were or stopped believing their parents would come for them. Dr. Julia Reed worked with research teams across human space to analyze captured Vorthak technology and develop countermeasures for their weapons. Her most important discovery was that alien computer systems were completely unprepared for chaotic, creative responses to military situations. The Vorthak had conquered dozens of species using predictable tactics, but they had never faced an enemy capable of true randomness and inspired insanity. Human infiltration teams began appearing on slave worlds, using stolen identity codes and alien uniforms to move through Vorthak facilities. They were not there to rescue the children yet, but to provide them with tools and information for the coordinated breakout that was being planned. Each team knew they would probably die in the attempt, but they also knew their sacrifice might save thousands of kids. The second phase of Operation Homecoming required perfect timing across multiple star systems. Human survivors had spent months studying Vorthak security protocols, looking for the brief windows when their systems would be vulnerable. They found that alien computers performed maintenance updates in synchronized cycles, creating short periods when planetary defenses would be offline. Marcus Gray had been a junior officer on a cargo ship before the aliens destroyed his life. Now he commanded a fleet of vessels built from salvaged parts and crewed by people who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. The ships were not designed to survive extended combat. They were weapons intended to deliver boarding parties to Vorthak strongholds before being destroyed by enemy fire. The children on the slave worlds had prepared for their moment with years of careful planning. They had learned to weaponize their captors' own training programs, allowing themselves to become skilled fighters while maintaining their humanity in secret. Bobby Chen had mastered Vorthak combat techniques and weapon systems, but he planned to use those skills to free his fellow prisoners rather than serve his alien masters. Emma's network had identified the exact moment when security systems would cycle for updates across 17 worlds. The children had spent months positioning themselves near critical facilities like power plants and communication centers. When the signal came, they would have minutes to seize control of planetary defenses before the Vorthak could respond. The aliens had made their greatest mistake in believing that human children could be broken and rebuilt as loyal soldiers. They did not understand that family bonds could survive any amount of torture or conditioning. The kids remembered their parents' faces and voices with perfect clarity. They dreamed every night about going home, and those dreams had become the foundation of a resistance movement that would tear apart the Vorthak Empire. As Admiral Gray's makeshift fleet approached the primary slave world of Vorthak Prime, both the orbital battle and planetary uprising were set to begin simultaneously. The humans had accepted that most of them would die in the attempt, but they had also calculated that their sacrifices would create enough chaos to allow the children to escape. For the first time in 3 years, parents and kids would fight, side by side against the enemies who had torn their families apart. The Vorthak were about to learn what happened when humans had nothing left to lose except the children they loved more than their own lives. The galaxy was about to witness the fury of a species that would rather die fighting than live without their families. The moment Admiral Marcus Gray's fleet dropped out of hyperspace near Vorthak Prime, the largest rescue operation in human history began with a violence that shocked the galaxy. 50 human ships faced off against 300 alien vessels, in orbit around the most heavily defended world in the Vorthak Empire. The odds were impossible, but the humans had not come to win a conventional battle. They had come to create enough chaos for their children to break free, and they were willing to die to make that happen. Gray stood on the bridge of his flagship, a converted cargo hauler that had been transformed into a battering ram covered with improvised weapons. His crew was made up of parents who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, and now they would either save their children or die trying. There was no middle ground and no retreat possible. The first phase of the battle began when human ships scattered in seemingly random directions, confusing Vorthak targeting systems that expected orderly formations. Captain Nancy White piloted her vessel directly into the center of the alien fleet, ignoring the plasma fire that was tearing her ship apart. Her only goal was to ram the Vorthak command ship and create a gap that would allow boarding parties to reach the planet's surface. Nancy's ship exploded against the alien vessel's shields in a fireball that could be seen from the planet below, but the impact disrupted the command ship's systems long enough for 6 human boarding craft to slip through the defensive line. Each small ship carried 20 volunteers who knew they would never see home again, but they also carried the tools and weapons the children would need for their uprising. On the planet's surface, Emma Foster felt her heart racing as she watched the battle through a stolen security monitor. She was 18 now, hardened by years of captivity but still fighting to maintain the hope that had kept her alive. Around her, 1,000 human children waited for the signal that would begin their coordinated revolt against their captors. They had been trained as soldiers by the Vorthak, but today they would use those skills to fight for their freedom. The Vorthak had made their greatest mistake in teaching human children to be perfect warriors. Bobby Chen moved through the slave barracks with deadly efficiency, using alien combat techniques to neutralize guards and seize weapons. Kate Morgan stood near the planetary shield generators, using her strange ability to influence electronics to slowly corrupt the control systems. Peter Hunt recited security codes from memory, guiding teams of young rebels toward critical targets throughout the facility. The children's uprising began exactly when the alien computers entered their maintenance cycle, creating brief windows of vulnerability in the security systems. Emma led her team toward the communications center while other groups moved on the power plant, vehicle depot, and weapons storage. They moved like the soldiers they had been trained to be, but they fought with a fury that came from years of separation from their families. In orbit, the human fleet was being systematically destroyed by superior Vorthak firepower, but every ship that died took at least one alien vessel with it. The humans had developed ramming tactics that their enemies could not counter because no sane species would sacrifice entire crews for minimal tactical advantage. Captain Lisa Hayes piloted her burning ship into a Vorthak destroyer, killing herself, and 200 alien crew members to clear a path for the next wave of attackers. The Vorthak commanders watched in growing horror as human ships continued to ram their vessels even when retreat was possible. Their military computers could not process tactics that prioritized emotional satisfaction over strategic logic. The aliens had conquered dozens of worlds using predictable battle plans, but they had never faced an enemy that was willing to trade dozens of lives for single tactical victories. Dr. Julia Reed monitored the battle from the last surviving human command ship, coordinating the chaos to maximize damage to Vorthak systems. She had spent 3 years studying alien psychology and had designed the entire operation to exploit their greatest weakness, their inability to understand truly irrational behavior. Every human sacrifice was calculated to create maximum confusion in enemy ranks. On the planet, the children's revolt was succeeding beyond their wildest hopes. Emma's team seized the communications center and began broadcasting messages to human children on other slave worlds. The signals triggered coordinated uprisings across 17 planets as thousands of young rebels turned their alien training against their captors. Years of careful planning were finally paying off in an explosion of violence that the Vorthak could not contain. The most devastating moment came when alien guards attempted to execute human prisoners as a deterrent to further rebellion. Instead of breaking the children's spirit, this triggered something the Vorthak had never seen before, a berserker rage that transcended normal human behavior. Kids who had appeared broken and compliant suddenly became killing machines that showed no mercy to their captors. Peter Hunt watched his best friend die under alien weapons and felt something snap inside his mind. The careful control he had maintained for years vanished, replaced by a fury that made him faster and stronger than he had ever been. He tore through enemy positions with his bare hands, using techniques the Vorthak had taught him to slaughter, the creatures who had stolen his childhood. In orbit, the tide of battle began to turn as human boarding parties reached critical alien ships. These were not conventional attacks designed to capture vessels intact. The humans carried explosives and computer viruses designed to cause maximum damage before the crews were killed. Ship after ship in the Vorthak fleet suffered catastrophic system failures as human saboteurs sacrificed themselves to cripple enemy capabilities. The Vorthak Empire had never faced an enemy like humanity, one that grew stronger under pressure, and more dangerous when their families were threatened. Their rigid military hierarchy began to collapse as commanders received reports that made no logical sense. Human forces were simultaneously being destroyed and winning the battle through tactics that appeared suicidal, but were actually carefully calculated to exploit alien weaknesses. Emma Foster stood in the captured communications center and sent a message that reached every human child in Vorthak space. Her voice was steady and strong as she spoke words that had been planned for 3 years. This is Emma Foster, calling all human children. Your parents are here. The rescue has begun. Fight with everything you have because we are going home today. The signal triggered the final phase of the uprising as children across the galaxy rose up against their captors. They used every skill the aliens had taught them, every weapon they could seize, and every ounce of strength they had developed during years of captivity. Most importantly, they fought with the knowledge that their parents had crossed the galaxy to find them and were dying in space to give them this chance at freedom. The battle for Vorthak Prime had become something the galaxy had never witnessed before. A war between parents and the creatures who had stolen their children. On one side were aliens who fought for conquest and control. On the other were humans who fought for love and family, and who had discovered that those motivations could overcome any technological advantage their enemies possessed. The final battle for Vorthak Prime raged across space and 17 worlds simultaneously, but the outcome was decided by something the aliens had never encountered in thousands of years of conquest: the fury of parents who would sacrifice everything for their children. Admiral Marcus Gray watched his fleet being destroyed ship by ship, but he also saw Vorthak vessels exploding as human boarding parties detonated themselves inside enemy hulls. This was not a conventional military victory, but it was working. Captain Nancy White had died ramming her ship into the alien command vessel, but her sacrifice created the chaos the humans needed. Vorthak coordination broke down as their flagship. Burned and secondary commanders struggled to maintain control over a battle that made no logical sense. Human ships attacked in patterns that appeared random, but were actually designed to exploit specific weaknesses in alien psychology and computer systems. On the planet's surface, Emma Foster led 1,000 human children in the largest slave revolt in galactic history. The uprising had spread beyond their original targets as kids throughout the facility rose up against their captors. Years of alien combat training became weapons turned against the Vorthak themselves. The creatures who had spent so much time breaking down human minds discovered that they had actually created an army of young warriors who remembered exactly who they were fighting for. The most devastating moment came when Vorthak guards began, executing human prisoners in an attempt to force the rebels to surrender. Instead of breaking their spirit, this triggered something that horrified even the battle-hardened alien soldiers: a coordinated berserker rage that transformed the children into killing machines. Kids who had appeared broken and compliant suddenly became predators that showed no mercy to their captors. Bobby Chen had been trained to kill efficiently and without emotion, but when he saw guards murdering defenseless human children, all his careful control vanished. He moved through enemy positions like a force of nature, using every technique the aliens had taught him to destroy the creatures who had stolen his life. Other children followed his example, turning their prison into a battlefield where the Vorthak found themselves outmatched by their own students. In orbit, the human fleet was taking casualties that would have broken any other species, but they pressed their attack with a determination that confused and terrified their enemies. Ships that were already burning and barely functional launched final ramming runs against alien vessels. Crews that should have been evacuating instead stayed at their posts to ensure maximum damage when their ships exploded. The Vorthak Command. Structure began to suffer complete system failure as their computers tried to process battle reports that made no sense. Human forces were being destroyed at an incredible rate, but they were also winning the battle through tactics that prioritized emotional satisfaction over strategic logic. Every human death created chaos in alien ranks as commanders struggled to understand an enemy that fought with such reckless fury. Kate Morgan stood in the Planetary Shield Control Center, using her strange ability to corrupt electronic systems from the inside. The Vorthak had never detected her talent for influencing computers through proximity alone, and now she used it to bring down the defenses that protected their most important world. Shield generators that had never failed began shutting down across the planet, opening paths for the few remaining human ships to reach the surface. Emma's team had seized the main communications center and was broadcasting messages that triggered uprisings on slave worlds across the galaxy. The signal reached children who had been waiting for years to hear their parents' voices. Peter Hunt recited the security codes he had memorized during his captivity, allowing rebel teams to access weapons and vehicles they needed to fight their way to freedom. The battle reached its climax when the last surviving human command ship broke through the Vorthak defensive line and entered the planet's atmosphere. Dr. Julia Reed piloted the burning vessel toward the slave compound where thousands of human children were fighting for their lives. She knew the ship would never fly again, but she also knew that her cargo of weapons and medical supplies could save the kids she had spent 3 years trying to reach. The Vorthak Empire was experiencing something they had never faced in their long history of conquest, the complete collapse of their military philosophy. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that defeated species would eventually accept alien rule and integrate into their hierarchy. They had never encountered an enemy that would rather die fighting than live in captivity, especially when their children were involved. As the uprising spread across multiple worlds, other conquered species began to realize that the seemingly invincible Vorthok could be defeated. Rebellions that had been brewing for decades suddenly exploded into open warfare as aliens who had served the Empire for generations turned against their masters. The kidnapping of human children had triggered a galactic revolution that threatened to tear apart everything the Vorthak had built. Emma Foster stood on the roof of the captured communications center and watched human ships burning in orbit above her head. She knew that most of the parents who had come to rescue them were dead or dying, but their sacrifice had given the children the chance they needed. All across the slave compound, young humans were fighting with skills their captors had taught them and fury their parents had inspired. The final breakthrough came when Kate Morgan's electronic manipulation brought down the last of the planetary shields. The few surviving human ships landed in the compound and disgorged teams of volunteers who had crossed the galaxy to bring their children home. Parents and kids fought side by side for the first time in 3 years, using everything they had learned during their separation to destroy the enemies who had torn their families apart. The Vorthak garrison on the planet found themselves facing an enemy they could not defeat or understand. Human children who had been perfect soldiers under alien command became perfect rebels when fighting for their freedom. The creatures who had spent years breaking down young minds discovered that they had failed to destroy the one thing that mattered most, the love between parents and children that could survive any amount of torture or conditioning. As the last, Vorthak's stronghold fell to combined forces of human children and their rescue teams. Emma Foster realized that they had accomplished something impossible. They had not just freed themselves from slavery, they had broken the back of an interstellar empire that had conquered dozens of worlds. The aliens who had thought themselves superior to humanity had learned that some bonds could not be severed by any technology or weapon. The rescue ships that finally lifted off from Vorthak Prime carried children who were no longer truly children, and parents who had been forged into warriors by years of separation and suffering. They had all been changed by their experiences in ways that would echo through human history. The families that reunited on those ships were different from the ones that had been torn apart 3 years earlier, but they were also stronger and more dangerous than any humans who had come before them. The story ended with humanity spreading across the galaxy not as conquerors but as liberators, carrying a simple message to every enslaved world. No one's children would ever be taken again. The phrase, "They enslaved our children and unleashed our fury," became the motto of the new human fleet that patrolled the stars, ensuring that Earth's kids and the children of every free species could grow up safely among the stars. The galaxy had learned that some species became more dangerous when their families were threatened, and humanity's fury, once awakened, would never sleep again.